Hey everyone, before we get into this episode, I just wanted to take a moment to personally thank you for tuning in to the pilot of Room for Growth. We're having so much fun making the show, and we have hit the ground running with some incredible conversations with brilliant minds in the growth marketing space. In our upcoming episodes, we have the masterminds behind Carl's Jr. and Hardy's digital strategy. We've got some spicy takes from the VP of Growth Marketing from Penguin Random House, and so much more. So, please make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss a beat. And thank you again for joining us. The show is truly a labor of love. And without further ado, I give you the very first episode of Room for Growth.
Okay, Billy, I feel like before we get started on our first episode of our brand new podcast, I feel like we have to address the elephant in the room. As I'm listening to that intro, I'm thinking, everybody has to, did I hear that correctly? It's two Billies. And so, you and I deal with this every single day, but that's right, both Billies. And, nothing screams digital marketing expertise than two Billies, right?
Two just like salt of the earth. Like if you met Billy and Billy, you might think we were twins. You might think we were both named Billy by the same set of very weird parents, but it's true. We get to do this intro 3 or 4 times a week. We get to be like, "Hello, I'm Billy, and I'm also Billy, and we're here to talk to you about technology."
Well, so we've gotten to know each other more and more over the past few months as we've been working closely together. And not only do we share the same name, but we've learned that we have a lot in common in some of our background. And we're both super, super passionate about digital marketing, life cycle marketing, and growth marketing, whatever term you want to stamp on it. I think we both get pretty jazzed up to help our clients in this new MarTech world. So I think that's what we're going to be talking a lot about over the next few episodes. And today we're talking about something even cooler than that, which is sports marketing, which I know we both get really excited about. And you've been super jazzed up about that lately.
Yeah, 100%. I just think when I look around right now, there are so many opportunities in live sports. Of course, I love sports. I love to attend games in person. I love to watch them on TV or through streaming or whatever platform you prefer. And I just look around and I think about how many opportunities there are to better engage sports fans, in part because technology is changing. So it's getting easier to, in real time, sort of create like interstitials in an app or on a website that help you understand what people care about in real time so you can start to personalize it. But there's also just like a huge void in the strategy and execution of live sports messaging. There's definitely some brands who are getting it right. Some of those are even our clients, so we get to brag about them a little bit. Um, but in general, I think this is just an area of opportunity. And then you can think about how just the structure of live sports, which is basically like how do you send things like push notifications or SMS messages or in-app experiences to engage people while they're either at a stadium watching a live event, which might be one experience, or they're at home watching it on TV and maybe they care about like multiple games that are going on, or they want an inside look in what's happening like at the actual stadium itself. There's so many opportunities, and finally the channels are coming available to really take advantage.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things during the pandemic, there was this period where all of a sudden, the core of many of these organizations is fans in seats. That completely went away, and a lot of them were pivoting, trying to figure out, okay, how can we continue to best optimize the experience? And so quickly, I've seen it with a few of our clients and elsewhere, they quickly pivoted into becoming almost a technology and product company. And some of the things that had been talked about, we've been talking about second screen since I did a quick second screen Google search, and the first article that popped up was from 2011. And it's like, okay, we really haven't made it that far since 2011. That article was talking about this second screen experience that really has never come to life. But what I am seeing recently are just even minor kind of enhancements. I just read that Peacock, when you open up Peacock, the app on your Roku or Apple TV, and you pull up a Premier League game, immediately if you're 10 minutes into that game already, on the bottom they're going to just do some quick highlights for you to show you like here's what you've missed as you're logging in, and so I know that doesn't really impact exactly what we're talking about today, but my point is the experience just continues to get better and better and better and better to where I think it's going to continue to unlock a bunch of opportunity. I also saw that FIFA is partnering up with Twitter to enable pregame. All the pregame stuff's going to happen on Twitter. You can watch it, participate in the conversation. And also during the game, they're going to start to partner up to where there's continual Twitter conversation. I think this stuff's been happening organically over time, but now the brands are starting to participate in it. So I don't know, I kind of lob that ball over to you, and I'm curious what you think. Like, how does that create opportunity for marketers to continue to engage in the experience?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. So, first of all, I think part of this is just being birthed out of need. Especially during the Olympics, what we really saw was fans were frustrated, viewers were frustrated that they couldn't find one unified source to figure out what was going to be on and when and where to stream it and how to stream it. And so, there's just some basic things here that fans want. I
Right.
think you're right. Twitter has been such a source of basically like live programming that you can follow along and kind of get the buzz of what's happening. But beyond that, fans just want some basic things. Like, I don't think we're talking about rocket science here. I think we're talking about pretty basic unmet fan needs. Things like that we hear from our clients in particular. If you are watching one football game or watching one March Madness game and there's another game on that you might care about not quite as much, you do want to know if that game is going to go into overtime. You do want to know if that game's really close. You might want a teaser or a highlight played back to you pretty rapidly. But the challenge with that for brands is like, how do you do that? How do you automate messages? How do you make sure that you don't have to have a whole room full of marketers working so that you can get the right and most relevant message to the right fans at the right time? And you can also segment it well, and you can make sure that you're not overburdening on frequency. So it is kind of a challenge. But the other like unmet fan need we hear about a lot is just simple recaps. Like, you wouldn't think basic dashboard features, things like what happened in all of the games and where can I see it and how can I have like a bit of a wrap up at my disposal. That's things that we're relying on brands to do. Like, sure, you can Google it, but also brands could put that in something like an in-app message, and it's dual purpose. It serves this unmet need, and then it gets your fans back in your app where you want them so they can ultimately make purchases or think about buying swag or a t-shirt or something like that. So anyway, that's some of the challenges that we're working to solve. Really simple on the surface, but when you get into why they're hard, a lot of it has to do with technology.
Right. Right. And that doesn't even factor in the amount of different platforms and kind of disparate services that are out there. Every arena uses a different ticket service, and so connecting with and knowing who's actually buying tickets and attending your events in person, and then connecting that to them streaming it from whatever device they use is, I guess, easier said than done. But I think over the next few years, that's really where the opportunity, brands that can figure that out, I feel like it's a really huge unlock. Do you agree?
Yeah, totally. I think we're going to see once again that so many sports brands in particular sort of like sold the rights to streaming, but they're realizing now they still have to own a part of that fan experience. And getting point of sale ticket data is one major behavior that they need to be able to track that's really difficult because they're usually not capturing it organically, as well as any sort of conversion that's happening in a stadium. And then the other big and really tricky one is, where are our fans watching? There's so many networks now streaming these different games that most brands in sports don't actually have access to that
Right.
data. So they don't know when or where or how often or how frequently their fans are streaming. So they're looking for creative ways to kind of like bridge that gap. But I think you're
Yeah.
exactly right around the technology piece as well. It's going to be table stakes.
Okay, and before we get, I mean, we're down into the weeds. We're dead serious, but like in all honesty, who's your team? Like what we got to let's establish these core basics out of the gate here.
Well, let's
Who's your team?
well, let's just start with like, which sport do you want to talk about? What are some of your favorites?
I don't know. So I tend to be an Ohio State guy. So we're just going to throw that out there. And inevitably, when I do that, I meet some Michigan person that we get. It's awkward. So we're going to have to figure out how to bring somebody onto our podcast, one of our guests that's a Michigan person. So I don't even know what that is.
Really?
What
I forgot how many rivalries we have because you know me, I'm a big Ducks fan.
Ducks fan?
And there is
Okay, yeah.
nothing a good Ducks fan hates more than Ohio.
Yeah. Well, and I know that recently that so all right, so that's college sports. Recently, you and I we won't give away too much here, but you and I have just reintroduced ourselves to wrestling and WWE, and so we went from college sports to sports and entertainment, and so I think we both have for the wrestling fans out there like our alter egos. Like, am I right?
That's totally right. Yeah. So I have long been a fan of like UFC, MMA, but then recently we have just been in deep with the WWE, and that has been so fun. I am Charlotte Flair through and through. She is my spirit animal. I wake up every morning now and I'm like, can I just embody the spirit of glittery, sparkly Charlotte Flair getting off a helicopter in her robe, like marching into
Yeah.
that stadium?
Yeah. It's interesting. We both chose villains because I have that same identity with Seth frickin' Rollins, who's another villain. So, uh, but it's funny, we talk about college basketball, NBA, professional, kind of traditional sport, and then WWE, which kind of blends entertainment and sport pretty closely. But they're both dealing with the same things. And hopefully, over the next few months, we can pull on some guests from a variety of these organizations to hopefully kind of expand on that and hear about some of the things they're dealing with. And then I think we're also going to talk to some of the platforms that are filling these gaps. And I'd love to pick their brain over the next few episodes here of, okay, what challenges are you seeing with connecting with all these disparate services? So hopefully we'll be able to get some of those on and unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, let's just do like one giveaway of like one of our favorite ideas that we're seeing work across lots of brands. We're trying to figure out how we bring it to every brand for whom this use case works for them. But it's things like if you own the rights to your team names, or if you can leverage different players or different characters, and of course, this expands really heavily into just media and streaming in general, content in general.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, instead of sending an email or sending a push notification from the brand that you are, and figure out how to send it from a favorite superstar in the WWE or send it from a certain player in a different league, that in and of itself is a huge double down on personalization. We're seeing that when we do that, things like retention rates or pickup rates for adoption of shows between seasons has a pretty big impact. So this isn't a use case that we actually did, but one example of this might be if somebody loves Game of Thrones. I think at this point we all know that Game of Thrones for HBO is just this huge driver of fans to their platform. So people would sign up, they'd create a subscription because they just wanted to see Game of Thrones, and then a pretty major challenge for them was that people would unsubscribe as soon as the season was over. Well, if you take those characters that are in the show and you use their actual name, their alias, to connect with fans and send emails from those fans saying, hey, I, character in the show, love this other show, or here's my friend, and you are really like humanizing these characters into somebody who's messaging you, that can have a pretty massive impact just on open rates, on click-through rates, on level of interest. It's just so different. It's different enough that it really sparks interest.
Awesome. And I gotta just kind of let the cat out of the bag here. I've never seen a single episode of Game of Thrones, so just throw me in that odd minority. So yeah, we'll address that later. I need better examples. In all seriousness, today we have a guest that's part of our team that we work with every day, and I think we wanted to bring Alyssa on to really expand on everything we just talked about. She's been working on some sports marketing related items for one of our clients here at Willow Tree, and there was kind of a core unlock.
100%. One of the tools that we'll get into as well is Braise. So it's no surprise that at Willow Tree we love Braise. We tend to straddle this line between are we consultants and strategists, or are we executioners? Sometimes we're a services agency because we're helping companies actually like launch every campaign that they build, but oftentimes we're helping them articulate what those campaigns should be, and we're helping them choose the technologies they work in. So Braise will be the other major partner at play here as we talk to Alyssa. She's a Braise expert. She's been using their various channels in really interesting ways, particularly some of the newer channels, things like content cards that are a little less known, where you can sort of almost create like a preference center-like experience inside the app itself, but you don't need engineers to help you build it.
Right.
And you can start to ask fans things like, which sport are you here for? Which teams do you care about? And then you can action that data really quickly without having to build out a full CRM experience around it. It's a really nice way to test quickly and figure out how to have some real-time data to understand like what different fans are interested in. So I'm not only excited to talk to Alyssa because she's just brilliant, like she is the person who dreams up these ideas and then figures out how to actually bring them to life, but excited to talk about how we really see Braise as one of our partners who's empowering these experiences too.
Okay, Billy. Well, today I think we're both pretty excited about our guest. You know, when we think about sports marketing and a lot of the observations we've been seeing with some of our clients and reading about in the greater space, we thought it would be awesome to have a member of our own team on the pod today to talk a little bit about a recent project that she's worked on that I think our listeners will find it interesting. So this is somebody that you work with a lot. Is that right, Billy?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I have the pleasure of introducing Alyssa Baker. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a moment and who she is and what she's been working on. But for some context, Alyssa was basically charged with both coming up with a strategy and as well as executing that strategy to better engage sports fans during March Madness and prove that some of the own channel work that she was doing around push and at messaging email could drive higher streaming sessions if it was done in a really personalized automated way. So I've been tracking this project with her because I've been super interested and curious about what kind of results she would drive. But when I say that it's driven great results, I'm talking about magnitude of like 200% increase in levels of engagement and conversions and starting streaming sessions. Some numbers that, at least for this client, are some of the highest that they've ever seen in their
Yeah.
history. So huge numbers, really successful. But the other thing that we're going to talk about, in addition to what was the strategy and how did you pull it off, is really the tool that helped empower this. So the primary platform that we'll be talking about today is Braise. For folks who are not familiar, Braise is a customer engagement platform. So it's a platform that brings together email push, in app messaging, SMS, content cards, all sorts of mobile and traditional owned channels so that you can create campaigns across each of those channels. You can test them against each other. You can automate based on different types of behavioral triggers. You can segment and personalize in really unique ways. So keep in mind that as we talk about the actual what was built and what Alyssa and her team did, that's the platform they were working in. Those were some of the requirements that were necessary to really be able to pull this off. So, without further ado, Alyssa, would you please just start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what your professional background has looked like?
Yeah, of course. Well, first off, just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So, my name is Alyssa, and I've been in the growth industry for a number of years now. And so far, I've had an opportunity to work across a variety of different verticals: cloud software, QSR, and most recently, media, and specifically sports engagement marketing. So, I myself, at heart, am not the biggest sports fan, but I will say I am so passionate about NCAA. I watch every single year. I follow college basketball, live here in Charlottesville, root for the Who's. So, any Who's fans out there. So, I was just really excited about the opportunity overall, as you said, just in terms of the sheer volume of people that we would be able to communicate with, just in terms of our reach and our impact. But as you already alluded to, as we'll talk about today, we still saw really, really great engagement rates, even while expanding our reach to new heights.
All right, Alyssa, let's jump into kind of the meat. So, before we talk about how you identified this opportunity to better engage sports fans, tell us a little bit about what your day to day looks like. What are you generally tackling over the course of a day, a week?
Yeah, definitely. Well, what I love so much about being a growth marketer is just how every day looks different, and how you're able to just tackle a wide variety of things. So, it's equal parts action oriented execution where you're getting high fidelity campaigns out the door for clients that are getting seen by a ton of people. It's equal parts reporting and insights where you're really diving into the data to understand, how does this inform future strategies, A/B testing ideas. Does this change our channel tactics at all? And then it's third parts, as I mentioned, strategy. We work closely with the client to really understand their competitor landscape, to understand their industry, and how it relates to growth marketing tactics.
Yeah, and then you work, I mean, obviously for a big client in a big industry. So just getting people aligned is another component of what you do. Talk to me a little bit about how you manage your team, you keep them on track, and then manage a huge number of stakeholders across a variety of different teams among the clients.
Yeah, definitely. So, one practice that we actually instituted when we joined the client that's been really helpful for us is actually the concept of window planning. So, for us, this looks like monthly campaign planning sessions where we actually meet with several members of their team. We have design, editorial, digital production, analytics, everybody. And then our full team is there, the people that work on reporting, the people that work on the actual campaign execution. And we're all in one room together where we actually work in sort of a virtual whiteboarding space where we have an opportunity to say, okay, what is coming down the pipeline for this next month or two? what shows or upcoming things should we be aware of, what thematic moments are maybe happening in society that we should play off of in terms of our messaging. And that's just really allowed us to get aligned as a team of, these are the big ideas that we want to move forward with. And our team will actually create, a really comprehensive campaign calendar from there where we dictate
Nice.
audience targeting strategies, channels, etc. And that really allows our internal team to stay aligned and know what the expectations are in a given month.
So one question I had, in this industry, you're doing both streaming of like television type content,
Yeah.
so fictional shows that are created, as well as sports and entertainment media, so live sports. There's a really big difference between doing audience segmentation and personalization for something like a TV show, where you can basically just follow like who's engaging, what else do they care about in the content space, and then who's watching episode up over episode. It's super different to think about how to engage a sports fan. So, first of all, how did you even identify sports as a major opportunity? And what were some of the insights that you used to start to hatch a plan here?
Yeah, so we had an opportunity not with the NCAA, but with other sports for this client to actually promote to some degree during the regular season. So we had actually dabbled a little bit in live stream push messaging for this client in the past, and what we saw is even though it's a really seems like a very simple strategy that okay, you send a scheduled push that is timed with when we want people to watch the live stream and actually timed with which teams are playing, when things are starting, letting them know which networks they're happening on. That seems like such a simple strategy, but we saw that it worked. Fans, no matter really how engaged they were or how often they might have generated a video play for that particular sports footage in the last week or so, they were still engaging with our push messaging. We were seeing higher lift than people that didn't receive our messaging, and so we could really speak to our influence. And so what we saw is that this actually very engaged audience does respond well and considers that messaging, highly relevant and timely to what they want to see.
That's awesome. So, Alyssa, can you tell me a little bit? You mentioned this generated really great results. What type of outcomes when you were generating this test and thinking, okay, we're going to engage with sports fans via push? What type of outcomes were you trying to drive? More, I mean, how do you measure these outcomes? What were you shooting for?
Yeah, so our strategy overall was actually three parts. So I know I've said a lot about push so far and how important that is for sports, but we did use other channels. And so we used email, in app, and push. And email and in app specifically were really helpful to us prior to the tournament to help build visibility. And we were really able there to cast a wider net. So for initiatives like that, what we were looking for is what are our overall impression volume? Like, how is the actual number of NCAA fans increasing over time, in terms of sheer audience sizes, because with those tactics, we were really trying to build awareness that coverage was happening on these networks. Once the tournament started, really the core of our CRM strategy was laid with push. That was the best way. And the goal with that at that point wasn't necessarily to generate awareness. It was how are we going to engage fans that have already in some way indicated that they're interested in the tournament through historical viewership patterns. So for that, what we were really looking for is just what are our actual campaign engagement metrics. So specifically, what are our push open rates looking like relative to the client's own benchmarks, but also relative to industry standards. Braise is good in that it gives you really comprehensive understanding of what the industry benchmarks are for the campaigns that you run. So we made sure to always compare, well, are we seeing higher levels of engagement, and we did.
Okay.
But I think really the most important KPI that we looked towards was video play rates. At the end of the day, the number one KPI for this client is how do we boost viewership? So we
Yeah.
were really trying to make sure that our messaging was having an impact on that.
Okay, that's awesome. That makes sense. Most of my experience is in commerce, and so I immediately think, a push notification that drives person to add something to their cart and push out and
Right.
and purchase it. Sorry, but in this particular case, live viewership. Can you double click and zoom in a little bit on what type of So if I'm receiving a push notification during March Madness, what kind of content were we sending to people?
Yeah, so I would say we had two main types of pushes that we leveraged. One that we were just calling our scheduled push strategy. So this is like it sounds. We know when coverage is starting for the day, when there's going to be a series of games happening for a particular round. So that was more of a simple strategy that consisted of us
Hmm.
saying, okay, we're going to send this push, drive to the live stream, communicate the really big things that we wanted to get across. So which teams are playing, what seeding, that would obviously help spur a little bit higher levels of engagement just to know how close those two teams were in terms of rank. But for that, it was really sort of just the facts. And to expand on that, something new that we did in the context of the tournament that we'd actually never done before for this client was experiment with what we then called as our second strategy, which is more real time messaging. So for that, we thought that there would be an opportunity, and what we were seeing in the landscape is how can we respond to some of these major moments that are happening during a game, for fans that actually haven't tuned in for that particular day. So that was a really good way for us to engage any fans that weren't daily active users and say, close game alert or
Mm,
upset alert, or hey, an overtime is about to start between
love
these
it.
two teams, and actually build the templates ahead of time. And so we leveraged both of those two strategies in tandem.
So, really logistical question here. I mean, like, if you are a 9 to 5 marketer, so to speak, right? You
Yeah.
are working kind of normal business hours here. You're trying to figure out how to deploy these messages in real time during prime time games. You can't use full automation, but what was the strategy? Was it fully manual? Was it fully automated? What would other people need to have in place in terms of a process to actually do this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that operationally we had to make sure we sat down with, our client stakeholder and the team ahead of time to align on what is the expectation for this, because it's going to be different than our ability to send a scheduled push. So what we found, it was a little bit of a hybrid. So it was not fully manual and not fully automated. So what our team would actually do is actually build a template ahead of time where we essentially had everything that you could possibly have ready in Braze, ready to go. The only thing that was missing essentially was, okay, what is this game? So who are the teams that are actually playing? So we basically had placeholders very clear that this is where you drop in team name one, this is where you drop in team name two. And then, of course, the only other contingency was, are you sending the push? So for that, we essentially had everything ready to go, and we had a coverage plan figured out with our client that was, okay, what games are you planning on covering? Is there somebody else from your team that's going to be able to cover this other day? We made sure that all of the templates were easily tagged in Braze, classified as real time alert, so that you could easily say, okay, I'm looking for a real time alert template. Is it a comeback? Is it an upset? Is it a close game? So it was really easily accessible for the
Cool.
client, and he was able to essentially swap in the team names and press send in the moment.
Interesting. So you had to have somebody who had decision-making authority actually making that final call, actively watching the content. It's not as if there's some kind of trigger that you can necessarily use. But as long as you have one person who's capable of making that judgment call to say, this moment matters, this is the time to send this category of this type of message, then it was easy for that person to do.
Yeah, I think that was something that we realized too when we're constantly driving towards automation, is that there is a degree of subjectivity involved here. How do you define a close game? Like, how many points is that? At what timing away from the end of the game does that actually set us up for it being a close game? And so that is how we chose to run the program, sort of for the first iteration of it. I would say, um, you know, moving forward, given the features that are available within Braze, we would be interested in exploring other ways that we could more automate. And one of those things I think that we can talk about in a little bit is something called connected content. So where you actually have a schedule that feeds Braze and tells you these are the teams that are playing. This is injected into your messaging. But I think for the first iteration, we decided to do more of a hybrid approach.
Got it. So you're kind
Awesome.
of doing some smoke screen testing now, or you're doing it in really manual ways to figure out what works, what's the timing, what's the formula.
Right.
But eventually, with connected content, you can just like feed these details and make some assumptions about whether or not a game is actually close,
Exactly.
because you may not actually even need to know that. It might be simple. Awesome. Okay.
So, Alyssa, not to dumb this down and ignore the strategic marketing aspect of this, but do you ever at any moment during these things just stop and say, like, wow, this is super cool? Because, as you're talking, I'm thinking you could go to every sports marketing class across every major university in the country and say, okay, we're looking for somebody to volunteer to work on March Madness, really come up with strategic efforts to drive engagement mid game, and you're going to need to watch the game too to know what's going on. I mean, do you ever just pause and say like, "Wow, this is pretty cool"?
Oh my gosh, yes, every single day. I mean, it just made me so jazzed to wake up in the morning to know that I was doing this type of promotion. And again, something that I was a fan of, something that I was passionate about, and was already going to be watching the tournament anyways,
Yeah,
even though all of my teams didn't make it this year.
that's awesome.
So.
Yeah. Did we do anything, or did as you guys were doing the window planning and moving towards kind of deploying some of these push notification strategies? Did we try anything that didn't, were there any hypothesis or tests that didn't pan out as strong as the push stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that as a team we're looking to experiment with more in the future is I spoke a lot about how we leveraged push for ongoing engagement with NCAA fans. So the goal there, of course, is NCAA viewership. But secondary to that, you obviously want to capitalize on this moment. There's going to
Right.
be elevated levels of app traffic, and is there an opportunity for us to cross sell other types of content to these fans and convert sports watchers into other types of series watchers.
Mm,
And so, we leverage Braise's in-app functionality a lot for that, and specifically, they have a variety of different formats that you can use. Some that are more obtrusive than others. And so, I think just exploring and iterating more on that testing strategy would probably be our future plan. Because we did see it's the fine balance of trying to capture people's attention when they're actively in the app, but we also very well know what they're in the app for. So we did see it generally as a really good awareness tactic just to build visibility, get those impressions up. But as far as, sort of overall engagement levels and ultimate conversion rates, we weren't really seeing the targets that we wanted to see. So I think that's something that we would explore more, or just shift our, what we expect out of that type of strategy.
So, how did you control for frequency? One of the things we hear about push all the time is that people really don't like to be inundated. They'll unsubscribe. I think a lot of marketers shy away from sending too many pushes, even though there's some hypotheses that in sports that's actually the appropriate time to like
mhm.
sort of serve push out like it's a billboard. How did you deal with that challenge around how much to send, how little to send, how to determine if somebody's engaged, not engaged in the content you're sending?
Yeah, I would say that one feature in Braze that's really helpful for this is their feature for frequency capping. So, that was also a conversation that we had with the client ahead of time. Is what number of push notifications do we feel comfortable sending on a weekly basis? And you can actually set a global target, and it will ensure that any one user won't receive any more than that target that you set in a given week. So that does allow you to sort of move forward with your messaging on a weekly basis without being so constrained every day to think about, well, did this user get this message? With that said, we did try to be really closely tied into the analytics, more so for sports than maybe we would for any other type of series messaging. And there was another tool that we used that made it really easy to do that too. Braze has these report builders where you can basically, using certain filters, just say, I want to pull any campaigns that have the word NCAA in them that fulfill this channel push. And it will actually spit out, here are how all of your campaigns have done in terms of video play rates, in terms of push open rates. So we were really able to see pretty easily, like, what are the trends in terms of open rates, making sure that everything is increasing, not decreasing. We're seeing good levels of engagement, and shift our strategy if needed from there.
Okay, but what's the golden number, Alyssa? If you had to tell people, send ish this many, what's kind of your ish number?
I just think that it's gonna depend on the audience. I don't think I know you're looking for a specific number, but I think it really depends on the audience, and you have to stay really clued into the analytics. I will say another opportunity that we found that differentiated us from competitors was in terms of our segmentation. So if you're not all the time being as, I'm just gonna blast this push notification to all of my app users or even all of my active app users, if you're being more cognizant of, well, what do their historical viewership consumption behaviors tell me about whether they would actually want to get this push messaging, which is something that we try to do with all of our messaging. Is we're not just going to blast you something, it's going to be based on a behavior that you've taken in the app. So I think that allows you to be a little bit more flexible with the number of pushes that you send as well, so long as they're more relevant.
And especially with March Madness, as you're talking, I'm thinking like March Madness is such a unique event where everything, everybody that's watching kind of all of a sudden has an interest in a team that they would never even care about. I mean, half the team sometimes I'm watching, I'm like, where is this team even located in the country?
Yeah.
And so this time sensitive nature of March Madness, you have ultimate engagement. I can't tell you how many times I have gotten distracted, or I'm watching one game and I don't realize that I missed this last second shot in this intense game. So the strategy that you are talking about makes so much sense. How do you think, as you were thinking about this and analyzing the results? I kind of just highlighted the uniqueness that is March Madness, where everybody loves every game, and there's just this intensity about it. But how do you think it translates to other live sports engagements? Is there anything that you learned that you think, if we have a listener that's a marketer on a completely different sport that doesn't have this intense tournament atmosphere, are there any things that you learned that you think would apply there as well?
Yeah, you're definitely right there. So I think why I wasn't able to give a golden number is exactly that. Because, we were seeing that in the context of the tournament, that level of frequency where every day a user is getting a notification time to say, hey, today is starting. These are the teams that are playing. Users responded really well to that type of messaging. But with other games like maybe MLB or NHL, you might not see the same allegiance towards just the sport in general. You might see people watching for very specific teams.
Mhm.
And in the absence, assuming that you don't have that information from your users, like, hey, this is the team that I prefer to hear from, you could risk doing what you're saying, which is sort of blasting, letting them know that, NHL is starting and there are teams that they don't care about. And so, the thing that we've realized too is we can apply these strategies to other sports. But again, we try to keep a very, very close eye on the push performance itself. So there's always an opportunity, I think, at the start of a given regular season or at the start of a playoff schedule where we're willing to be a little bit more broad with our
Right.
targeting, still using consumption patterns to say, would you want this push or not? But if we don't see that the engagement rates are there, we will drop off people that have not been active within a certain window of time or are not responding to our push messaging. So we are responsive to the data, and we'll be willing to shift that for specific sports based on what we're seeing.
That's super interesting. I hear you saying that there's a correlation between the higher the buzz around the event, the higher people's tolerance generally are to receive messaging. I think that's super insightful. Um, to Billy's question around how do you apply the same March Madness strategy to live sports, good answer. But are there other takeaways for people who aren't in sports? What advice would you give to them based on what you've learned?
Yeah, I think that the last comment that you made actually tees up my answer quite well. So I'll first just start by explaining because there was one tactic that we explored that we saw really, really great results that I haven't touched on yet, which will relate to this. So we often throughout our messaging, we'll do a lot of ongoing engagement messaging where we're messaging fans that are active. They're responding well to our messaging. But there was a point in time in the tournament where we questioned, there's definitely a decent number of people that have dropped off. Either they have teams that they had allegiances to that are no longer in the tournament, or they were just watching for their bracket and their bracket was busted, which this tournament, there were a lot of upsets. I don't know if you guys both watched, but a ton as to be expected. So there was sort of a point in time where we realized, hey, there's probably a lot of people that have checked out. And so this was a really good
Mm.
opportunity for us to say, what is our re-engagement strategy? We know that we can't recoup the full percentage of those inactive viewers, but how do we try to get a percentage of them back into the fold and watching again? And so I think just knowing that you'll do this brainstorming session ahead of time, you'll plan out your window planning, and this can apply to really any industry. You've planned every channel, you've planned every concept. You need to be responsive to the broader landscape
Yeah.
of what's happening and the broader context. I mean, Duke versus UNCA for any NCAA non fans out there, these are two historic rivals. Like you hear about it everywhere about how they're that in terms of whenever those teams match up, I mean viewership just skyrockets. And this was actually the first time that they had ever met in the tournament. And not only that, but they met in the final four. So, and that's actually when we saw a lot of drop off happening between viewership. So this for us was a moment to say, hey, let's play up sort of the FOMO aspect of
Mm.
you need to watch this game because people are going to be talking about it for the rest of our lives. And they are. I mean, that was like the highest watched game on television. And if you're sitting here saying, "Oh, I didn't watch that," we wanted to play up that aspect of this is a historic moment. You can't miss this. So I would just say, like, know that all your best planned efforts and strategies, you might need to make some shifts, and there will be things happening that you need to be responsive to. And to your point, anything that you can do to promote your given product, but tie it back to what is the value proposition for the user. So in this case, these people were totally checked out. They had no interest in watching the tournament anymore. So we tried to say, okay, well, what would bring them back in? And for us, it was, we think you're going to feel like you're missing out if you don't, and we're going to tell you how historic this moment is.
So, final question here, Alyssa. This was super great. Thank you so much for talking us through what you did, how it worked, why it worked. But we keep talking about why this is pretty simple. And frankly, it is. It's basic marketing. It's send a message at the right time to the right people to get them to take their eyes and put them where you want them. If it's so simple, why was it so groundbreaking? Like, why aren't more brands doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's, even though the strategy at its core sounds so simple, to actually put this, into execution and into action, there are so many moving parts that need to be able to work seamlessly together. I think, first being able to have the time and the space to take a couple of steps back and just brainstorm with a client, as I mentioned, doing that strategy session where we planned and we really threw out any and all ideas that we would want to explore, and then from there tried to get a little bit more tactical execution focused on what do we actually have the operational capacity to do, because there's definitely more that we would have loved to explore, other tests that we would have loved to run, but you need to really understand, your team's capacity and bandwidth to be able to handle this type of messaging. And like I said, even with the real time push capacity, who's going to be able to cover those games, watch, be responsive, be nimble in the moment. So I think, just as much as strategizing ahead of time was so important and having the space to do that, I think second, having the operational capacity, because as you mentioned, this is a really, really popular tournament. There's a lot of eyes on the tournament and not a lot of people that get to promote it. So there's definitely, a stress there, right? You're sending this messaging to a lot of people. You need to have the right checks and balances and quality assurance processes in place to make sure that everything that goes out the door is flawless, even when you're doing real-time messaging. So I think that's the second part of it. And then third, not to, totally fangirl on Braise, but I'm just going to, you need to have the right technology and tool. You need to have the right data infrastructure in place to say, we have access to customer data that's going to be really valuable to allow us to do proper segmentation, to ensure that we're not over messaging people. We have the right features, the right strategies in place, and that the channel, the way that we build channels within this platform is really intuitive, which it is. So I think all three of those things combined allowed it to be successful.
It's awesome, and
Awesome.
a lot of people have the right tools, but I always use the analogy they buy a Ferrari and then drive it like a Honda Accord in a 35 zone,
Exactly.
and so it's like knowing these tools and actually deploying them. Alyssa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Your energy is contagious, and it just kind of yeah, I hopefully sparks some ideas for folks to maybe step back and rethink an upcoming campaign that they have in the forward. What am I trying to say? That look at a new campaign that they have coming up with a fresh set of eyes and maybe try something new.
All right. So, Alyssa, at the end, we always like to invite people to talk kind of positive trash about a brand that they love. I know that you and I have one thing in common. We both love loyalty programs and
Oh
have
yeah.
like a little obsession with loyalty program.
Yes.
What is your favorite loyalty program and why? Who do you think like does this the best?
I would probably have to say Sephora.
Ah,
Mm.
yeah, they are the best. Oh, why? Why do you think that?
Yeah, well, alone, I'm a little bit swayed because I just have such an affinity for this brand. I mean, I love them, currently wearing Sephora, sponsor me, thank you. No, I'm just kidding, but I do love their product. But I also think, to your point, the loyalty program is just so effective in terms of how they've managed, all these different tiers and through the Beauty Insider program. I mean, I am always trying to level up, more points. What is that going to mean in terms of the rewards that or incentives that I get as a result? And I am incentivized to, to buy things on the website, to go into the store, because I know that I might have access to certain incentives or certain things. And I think they reinforce that constantly as well throughout their messaging. I mean, I'm receiving the right number of emails. They're creative. The subject lines always manage to catch me with whatever else I'm doing and are really compelling. And so I think that they are not just a brand to aspire to, but also they're doing well in the space as well.
I would talk more
Awesome.
about this, but I insist that we have an entire episode where
I
we
think so.
break down the frameworks of why Sephora's loyalty program is so superior. And then we can fight about Billy's favorite loyalty
Yeah.
programs.
Yeah, it's not
But
Sephora.
yeah,
I'm not a
you're right.
member, even though I'm a dad of two daughters, not a member of the Sephora loyalty program yet, at least. Uh, so yeah, we definitely have to have. I think we've got in the mix and planning for some podcasts ahead to really zoom
Perfect.
in on loyalty programs. So maybe we can get somebody on from Sephora. Well, Alyssa, again, thank you so much for coming on the pod today and sharing some of your thoughts around how you use Braise at the most recent March Madness to drive new engagement. We hope it was helpful for our viewers, and we appreciate your energy. Thank you so much.